Hi, I am the Anna part of Tanya and Anna doing our reread of Terry Pratchett's The Night Watch, which I guess is going to show up looking backwards for you. As you can see, my copy is extremely well worn. It was actually reading this book for the first time that I decided that one day I wanted a son named Sam. And so, much like Tanya, I am also not a dramatic reader. I am reading in my bathroom because this is the one place in my house I have even the slightest hope of any sort of quiet or uninterrupted reading time. And I think I'm looking the wrong way at the camera too. So I will do my best, and then tomorrow you will get Tanya. So this is Terry Pratchett's The Night Watch. And we have a beautiful map of Ankmore Park for your viewing pleasure. Sam Vimes sighed as... Fucking up already. Sam Vimes sighed when he heard the scream, but he finished shaving before he did anything about it. Then he put his jacket on and strolled out into the wonderful late spring morning. Birds sang in the trees, bees buzzed in the blossom. The sky was hazy, though, and thunderheads on the horizon threatened rain later. But for now, the air was hot and heavy. And in the old cesspit behind the gardener's shed, a young man was treading water. Well, treading anyway. Vimes stood back a little way and lit a cigar. It probably wouldn't be a good idea to employ a naked flame any nearer to the pit. The fall from the shed roof had broken the crust. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Good morning, Your Grace," said the industrious treadler. The voice was higher pitched than Vimes expected, and he realized that, most unusually, the young man in the pit was in fact a young woman. It wasn't entirely unexpected. The Assassin's Guild was aware that women were at least equal to their brothers when it came to inventive killing, but it nevertheless changed the situation somewhat. "I don't believe we've met," said Vimes, "although I could see you know who I am. You are—" "Wiggs, sir," said the swimmer. "Jocasta Wiggs. Honored to meet you, Your Grace." And just as an aside, I do adore the name Jocasta. "Wiggs, eh?" said Vimes. "Famous family in the guild. Sir will do, by the way. I think I once broke your father's leg?" "Yes, sir. He asked to be remembered to you," said Jocasta. "You're a bit young to be sent out on this contract, aren't you?" said Vimes. "Not a contract, sir," said Jocasta, still paddling. "Come on now, Miss Wiggs. The price on my head is at least—" "The Council Guild put it in abeyance, sir," said the dogged swimmer. "You're off the register. They're not accepting contracts on you at present." "Good grief. Why not?" "Couldn't say, sir," said Miss Wiggs. Her patient struggles had brought her to the edge of the pit, and now she was finding that the brickwork was in very good repair, quite slippery, and offered no handholds. Vimes knew this because he'd spent several hours one afternoon carefully arranging that this should be so. "So why were you sent here, then?" "Miss Band sent me as an exercise," said Jocasta. "I say, these bricks really are jolly tricky, aren't they?" "Yes," said Vimes, "they are. Have you been rude to Miss Band lately? Upset her in any way?" "Oh, no, Your Grace, but she did say I was getting overconfident and would benefit from some advanced field work." "Ah, I see." Vimes tried to recall Miss Alice Band, one of the Assassin's Guild's stricter teachers. She was, he'd heard, very hot on practical lessons. "So she sent you to kill me then?" she said. "No, sir, it's an exercise. I don't even have any crossbow bolts. I just had to find a spot where I could get you in my sights and then report back." "She'd believe you?" "Of course, sir," said Jocasta, looking rather hurt. "Guild honor, sir." Vimes took a deep breath. "You see, Miss Wiggs, quite a few of your chums have tried to kill me at home in recent years. As you might expect, I take a dim view of this." "Easy to see why, sir," said Jocasta, in the voice of one who knows that their only hope of escaping from their present predicament is reliant on the goodwill of another person who has no pressing reason to have any. "And you'd be amazed at the booby traps that are around the place," Vimes went on. "Some of them are pretty cunning, even if I say it myself." "I certainly never expected the tiles on the shed to shift like that, sir." "They're on greased rails," said Vimes. "Well done, sir." "And quite a few of the traps drop you into something deadly," said Vimes. "Lucky for me that I fell into this one, eh, sir?" "Oh, that one's deadly too," said Vimes. "Eventually deadly." He sighed. He'd really wanted to discourage this sort of thing, but they'd put him off the register. It wasn't that he'd liked being shot at by hooded figures in the temporary employ of his many and varied enemies, but he'd always looked at it as some kind of vote of confidence. It showed that he was annoying the rich and arrogant people who ought to be annoyed. Besides, the Agassins Guild was easy to outwit. They had strict rules, and which they followed quite honourably. And this was fine by Vimes, who, in certain practical areas, had no rules whatsoever. Off the register, eh? The only other person not on it anymore, it was rumoured, was Lord Veterinary, the patrician. The assassins understood the political game in the city better than anyone, and if they took you off the register, it was because they felt your departure would not only spoil the game, but also smash the board. I'd be jolly grateful if you could pull me out, sir, said Jocasta. What? Oh, yes, sorry, got clean clothes on, said Vimes. But when I get back to the house, I'll tell the butler to come down here with a ladder. How about that? Thank you very much, sir. Nice to have met you, sir. Vimes strolled back to the house. Off the register. Was he allowed to appeal? Perhaps, they thought. The scent rolled over him. He looked up. Overhead, a lilac tree was in bloom. He stared. Damn, damn, damn. Every year he forgot. Well, no, he never forgot. He just put the memories away like old silverware that you didn't want to tarnish. And every year they came back, sharp and sparkling, and stabbed him in the heart. And today of all days. He reached up, and his hand trembled as he grasped a bloom and gently broke the stem. He sniffed at it. He stood for a moment staring at nothing, and then he carried the sprig of lilac carefully back to his dressing room. Willikins had prepared the official uniform for today. Sam Vimes stared at it blankly and then remembered. Watch committee, right. The battered old breastplate wouldn't do, would it? Not for His Grace the Duke of Ankh, commander of the City Watch, Sir Samuel Vimes. Lord Veterinary had been very definite about that, blast it. Blast it all the more because, unfortunately, Sam Vimes could see the point. He hated the official uniform, but he represented a bit more than just himself these days. Sam Vimes had been able to turn up for meetings with grubby armour, and even Sir Samuel Vimes could generally contrive to find a way to stay in street uniform at all times. But a duke? Well, a duke needed a bit of polish. A duke couldn't have the arse hanging out of his trousers when meeting foreign diplomats. Actually, even plain old Sam Vimes had never had the arse hanging out of his trousers either, but no one would have actually started a war if he had. The plain old Sam Vimes had fought back. He'd got rid of most of the plumes and the stupid tights, and ended up with a dress uniform that at least looked as though its owner was male. But the helmet had gold decorations, and the bespoke armourers had made a new gleaming breastplate with useless gold ornamentation on it. Sam Vimes felt like a class traitor every time he wore it. He hated being thought of as one of those people that wore stupid ornamental armour. It was guilt by association. He twirled the sprig of lilac in his fingers and smelled again the heady smell. Yes, it hadn't always been like this. Someone had just spoken to him. He looked up. What? He barked. I inquired if her ladyship is well, your grace, said the butler, looking startled. Are you feeling all right, your grace? What? Oh, yes, no, I'm fine. So is her ladyship. Yes, thank you. I popped in before I went outside. Mrs. Content is with her. She says it won't be for a while. I've advised the kitchen to have plenty of hot water ready, your grace, nevertheless, said Willikins, helping Vimes on with a guilty breastplate. Yes. Why do they need all that water, do you think? I couldn't say, your grace, said Willikins. Probably best not to inquire. Vimes nodded. Sybil had already made it quite clear with gentle tact that he was not required on this particular case. It had been, he had to admit, a bit of a relief. He handed Willikins the sprig of lilac. The butler took it without comment, inserted it into a little silver tube of water that would keep it fresh for hours, and fixed it to one of the breastplate straps. Time moves on, doesn't it, your grace, he said, dusting him down with a small brush. Vimes took out his watch. It certainly does. Look, I'll drop in at the yard on my way back to the palace, sign what needs signing, and I'll be back as soon as possible, all right? Willikins gave him a look of almost unbutlery concern. I'm sure her ladyship will be fine, your grace, he said. Of course, she is not young, said Vimes. I would say she is richer in years than many other prime gravide, said Willikins smoothly, but she is a well-built lady, if you don't mind me saying so, and her family have traditionally had very little trouble in the childbirth department. Prime what? New mothers, your grace. I'm sure her ladyship would much rather know you were running after miscreants than wearing a hole in the library carpet. I expect you're right, Willikins. Oh yes, there's a young lady dog paddling in the old cesspit, Willikins. Very good, Your Grace. I shall send the kitchen boy down there with a ladder directly, and a message to the Assassin's Guild. Good idea. She'll need clean clothes and a bath. I think, perhaps, the hose in the old scullery might be more appropriate, Your Grace. To start with, at least. Good point. See to it. And now I must be off. In the crowded main room of the Pseudopolis Yard watchhouse, Sergeant Colin absent-mindedly adjusted the sprig of lilac that he'd stuck into his helmet like a plume. They go very strange, Nobby, he said, leafing listlessly through the morning's paperwork. It's a copper thing. Happened to me when I had kids. You get tough. What do you mean tough? Said Corporal Nobbs, possibly the best living demonstration that there was some smooth evolution between humans and animals. Well, said Colin, leaning back in his chair, it's like, well, when you're our age. He looked at Nobby and hesitated. Nobby had been giving his age as probably 34 for years. The Nobbs family were not good at keeping count. I mean, when a man reaches a certain age, he tried again, he knows the world is never going to be perfect. He's got used to it being a bit manky, Nobby suggested. Tucked behind his ear in the place usually reserved for his cigarette was another wilting lilac flower. Exactly, said Colin. Like, it's never going to be perfect, so you just do the best you can, right? But when there's a kid on the way, well, suddenly a man sees it different. He thinks, my kid's going to have to grow up in this mess. Time to clean it up. Time to make it a better world. He gets a bit keen, full of ginger. When he hears about strong in the arm, it's going to be very hot around here for... Morning, Mr. Vimes. Talking about me again, eh? Said Vimes, striding past them as they jerked to attention. He had not, in fact, heard any of the conversation, but Sergeant Colin's face could be read like a book, and Vimes had learned it by heart years ago. Just wondering if the happy event, Colin began, trailing off after Vimes as he took the stairs two at a time. It hasn't, said Vimes shortly. He pushed open the doors to his office. Morning, Carrot. Captain Carrot sprang to his feet and saluted. Morning, sir. How's Lady... No, Carrot, she is not. What's been happening overnight? Carrot's gaze went to the sprig of lilac and back to Vimes's face. Nothing good, sir, he said. Another officer killed. Vimes stopped dead. Who? He demanded. Sergeant Strong in the arms, sir. Killed in Treacle Mine Road. Cursor again. Vimes glanced at his watch. They had 10 minutes to get to the palace, but suddenly time wasn't important anymore. He sat down at his desk. Witnesses? 3 this time, sir. That many. All dwarfs. Strong in the arm wasn't even on duty, sir. He'd signed off and was picking up a rat pie and chips from a shop and walked straight out into Cursor. The devil stabbed him in the neck and ran for it. He must have thought we'd found him. We've been looking for the man for weeks, and he bumped into poor old Strong in the arm when the dwarf was thinking of his breakfast. Is Angua on the trail? Up to a point, sir, said Carrot awkwardly. Why only up to a point? Well, we assume it was Cursor. Dropped an aniseed bomb in Sartor Square, almost pure oil. Vimes sighed. It was amazing how people adapted. The watch had a werewolf. That news had gotten around in an underground kind of way, and so the criminals had evolved to survive in a society where the law had a very sensitive nose. Scent bombs were the solution. They didn't have to be that dramatic. You just dropped a little flask of pure peppermint or aniseed in the street, where a lot of people would walk over it, and suddenly Sergeant Angua was facing 1,000 crisscrossing trails and went to bed with a terrible headache. He listened glumly as Carrot reported on men brought off leave or put on double shift, on informers pumped, pigeons stooled, grasses rustled, fingers held to the wind, ears put to the street. And he knew how little it all added up to. They still had fewer than 100 men in the watch, and that was including the canteen lady. There were 1 million people in the city and 1 billion places to hide. Ankh-Morpork was built of bolt holes. Besides, Cursor was a nightmare. Vimes was used to the other kinds of nut jobs, the ones that acted quite normally right up to the point where they hauled off and smashed someone with a poker for blowing their nose noisily. But Cursor was different. He was in 2 minds, but instead of them being in conflict, they were in competition. He had a demon on both shoulders, each urging one another on. And yet, he smiled all the time in a cheerful, chirpy sort of way, and acted like the kind of rascal who made a dodgy living selling gold watches that go green after a week. And he appeared to be convinced, utterly convinced, that he never did anything really wrong. He'd stand there amid the carnage, blood on his hands and stolen jewelry in his pocket, and with an expression of injured innocence declare, Me? What did I do? And it was believable right up until you looked hard into those cheeky smiling eyes and saw deep down the demons looking back. But you mustn't spend too much time looking at those eyes, because that means you're taking your eyes off his hands, and by now one of them held a knife. It was hard for the average copper to deal with people like that. They expected people, when heavily outnumbered, to give in or try to at least stop moving. They didn't expect people to kill for a $5 watch. A $100 watch now, that'd be different. This was Ankh-Morpork, after all. Was Strong in the Arm married? He said. No, sir. Lived in New Cobblers with his parents. Parents, thought Vimes. That made it worse. Anyone been to tell them? He asked. And don't say it was Nobby. We don't want a repeat of that bet you're a dollar, you're the Widow Jackson nonsense. I went, sir, as soon as we got the bad news. Thank you. They took it badly? They took it solemnly, sir. Vimes groaned. He could imagine their expressions. I'll write them the official letter, he said, pulling open his desk. Get someone to take it round, will you? And I'll be over later. Perhaps this isn't the time to... No, hold on. They were dwarves. Dwarves weren't bashful about money. Forget that. Say we'll have all the details of his pension and so on. Died on duty, too. Well, near enough. That's extra. It all adds up. He rummaged in his cupboards. Where's his file? Here, sir, said Carrot, handing it over smoothly. We are due at the palace at 10, sir. Watch committee. But I'm sure they'll understand, he added, seeing Vimes's face. I'll go and clean out Strong in the Arm's locker, sir, and I expect the lads will have a whip round for flowers and everything. Vimes pondered over a sheet of headed paper after the captain had gone. A file. He had to refer to a damn file. But there were so many coppers these days. A whip round for flowers, and a coffin. You look after your own. Sergeant Dickens had said that a long time ago. He wasn't good with words, least of all the ones written down, but after a few glances at the file to refresh his memory, he wrote down the best he could think of. And they were all good words, more or less, and they were the right ones. But Strong in the Arm was just a decent dwarf who'd been paid to be a copper. He joined up because these days joining the watch was quite a good choice of career. The pay wasn't bad, there was a worthwhile pension, and there was a wonderful medical scheme if you had the nerve to submit to Igor's ministrations in the cellar. And after a year or so, an Ankh-Morpork-trained copper could leave the city and get a job in the watches of other cities on the plains with instant promotion. That was happening all the time. Sammies, they were called, even in towns that had never heard of Sam Vimes. He was just a little proud of that. Sammies meant watchmen who could think without their lips moving, who didn't take bribes, much, and then even at the level of beer and donuts, which even Vimes recognized as the grease that helps the wheels run smoothly, and were on the whole trustworthy, for a given value of trust at least. The sound of running feet indicated that Sergeant Detritus was bringing some of the latest trainees back from their morning run. He could hear the jody Detritus had taught them. Somehow you could tell it was made up by a troll. Now we sing this stupid song, sing it as we run along. Why we sing this we don't know, we can't make their words rhyme properly. Sound off, 1, 2, sound off, many, lots, sound off, what? It still irked Vimes that the little training school in the old lemonade factory was turning out so many coppers who quit the city the moment the probation was up. But it had its advantages. There were Sammies almost as far as Uberwald now, all speeding up the local promotion ladder. It helped, knowing names and knowing those names had been taught to salute him. The ebb and flow of politics often meant that local rulers weren't talking to one another, but via the semaphore towers the Sammies talked all the time. He realized he was humming a different song under his breath. It was a tune he'd forgotten for years. It went with the lilac, scent and song together. He stopped, feeling guilty. He was finishing the letter when there was a knock at the door. Nearly done, he shouted. It's me, sir, said Constable Igor, pushing his head round the door. And then he added, Igor, sir. Yes, Igor, said Vimes, wondering not for the first time why anyone with stitches all around his head needed to tell anyone who he was. And here's the footnote. The Igor employed by the watch as forensic specialist in medical aid was quite young, insofar as you could tell with an Igor, since useful limbs and other organs were passed on among Igors the way they might hand on a pocket watch, and very modern in his thinking. He had a DA haircut with extended quiff, wore crepe soles, and sometimes forgot to lisp. I would just like to say, sir, that I could have got young Strong in the Arm back on his feet, sir, said Igor, a shade reproachfully. Vimes sighed. Igor's face was full of concern, tinged with disappointment. He had been prevented from plying his craft. It was natural he was disappointed. We've been through this, Igor. It's not like sewing a leg back on, and dwarves are dead set against that sort of thing. There's nothing supernatural about it, sir. I'm a man of natural philosophy. And he was still warm when they brought him in. These are the rules, Igor. Thanks all the same. We know your heart is in the right place. They are in the right places, sir, said Igor reproachfully. That's what I meant, said Vimes without missing a beat, just as Igor never did. Oh, well, sir, said Igor, giving up. He paused and said, How is her ladyship, sir? Vimes had been expecting this. It was a terrible thing for a mind to do, but he had already presented him with the idea of Igor and Sybil in the same sentence. Not that he disliked Igor, quite the reverse. There were watchmen walking around the streets right now who wouldn't have legs if it wasn't for Igor's genius with a needle. But, fine, she's fine, he said abruptly. Only I heard that Mrs. Content was a bit Igor, there are some areas where... Look, do you know anything about women and babies? Not in so many words, sir, but I find once I've got someone on the slab and had a good rummage, around, I can sort out most things. Vimes's imagination actually shut down at this point. Thank you, Igor, he managed, without his voice trembling, but Mrs. Content is a very experienced midwife. Just as you say, sir, said Igor, but doubt wrote on the words. I've got to go now, said Vimes. It's going to be a long day. He ran down the stairs, tossed the letter to Sergeant Colin, nodded to Carrot, and set off at a fast walk to the palace. After the door had shut, one of the watchmen looked up from the desk where he'd been wrestling with a report in the effort of writing down, as policemen do, what ought to have happened. Sarge? Yes, Corporal Ping? Why are some of you wearing purple flowers, Sarge? There is a subtle change in the environment, a suction of sound caused by many pairs of ears listening intently. All the officers in the room had stopped writing. I saw you and Reg and Nobby wearing them this time last year, and I wondered if we were all supposed to, Ping faltered. Sergeant Colin's normally amiable eyes had narrowed, and the message they were sending was, You're on thin ice, lad, and it's starting to creak. My landlady's got a garden, and I could easily go and cut a... Ping went on, in an uncharacteristic attempt at suicide. You'd wear the lilac today, would you? Said Colin quietly. I just meant that if you wanted me to, I could go and... Were you there? Said Colin, getting to his feet so fast his chair fell over. Steady, Fred, murmured Nobby. I didn't mean, Ping began. Was I where, Sarge? Colin leaned on the desk, bringing his round face an inch away from Ping's nose. If you don't know where there was, you weren't there, he said, in the same quiet voice. He stood up straight again. Now me and Nobby has got a job to do, he said. At ease, Ping. We are going out. This was not going to be a good day for Corporal Ping. Yes, said Colin. Standing orders, Sarge. You're the ranking officer, you see, and I'm an orderly officer for the day, and I wouldn't ask otherwise, but if you're going out, Sarge, you've got to tell me where you're going, just in case anyone has to contact you, see? I got to write it down in the book, and pen and everything, he added. You know what day it is, Ping, said Colin. 25th of May, Sarge. And do you know what that means, Ping? It means, said Nobby, that anyone important enough to ask where we're going knows where we're gone, said Fred Colin. The door slammed behind them. That's it for today.